Welcome to Beyond the Basics and my little video to support the newsletter. And this newsletter was all about storytelling, and so I wanted to make this video specifically around the notion of the telling part. So not only do we need to think about the content, which is outlined in the newsletter, just some really basic traditional story structure elements to keep in mind as you're thinking about constructing a narrative, not only for these smaller stories, anecdotal stories, but as you're constructing larger narratives. If you're putting together an entire deck that's 15, 20, 30 slides, there better be a way that you're moving through that intuitively, and narrative structure and compelling story is what's going to allow that to feel cohesive and anchored under something that feels singular, therefore more accessible to your audience. So that's a content aspect. But we need to remember that it's storytelling, not story writing. So the way that you deliver it is going to be fundamental to the story being received and the way in which you intend. We can have the most effective stories constructed. We can invite the imagination. We can bring in all of those elements around senses. How did it taste? How did it feel? What time of day was it? We can have the call to adventure. We can introduce a series of obstacles. But then if we deliver it in a way that doesn't represent the dramatic moment of the story itself, then we're losing a piece of the storytelling. So what's going to be essential here is voice. Voice and pacing and tone. That is an equal, if not arguably more essential element to telling the story. How we invite moments when we come down and then, I don't know, maybe come back up and bring our voice into bigger places and then invite pause and then maybe change the rhythm a little, shifting our tone up and down to meet the moment of the story itself. If it's a moment that requires sincerity, the pause that you invite around these big ideas, these sincere moments of contemplation for your audience, that pause, that moment of not speaking is equally as important as the idea or thought that preceded or follows the pause. So that pause is going to be just as essential to your storytelling as the words of the stories themselves. We also want to think about gesture and movement. All of those nonverbals are going to come in when it relates to storytelling. If you go to the video below this in the newsletter where it says, listen to this, that's the Moth Story podcast. Incredible podcast. If you haven't heard it, go listen. I binge it all the time. I cannot get enough. And it's all audio. And so when we're talking about gesture, when we're talking about those nonverbals regarding body language, those are going to be fundamental when you're in person or when you're presenting virtually. But we know that voice is an even bigger component of that. And so you'll hear on those podcasts, you might even be able to identify it with me here, is that the way they set up different sections, the way they introduce characters, the way they have these sincere moments of challenge or consideration before introducing a new idea, we can hear that vocally. So give yourself the opportunity when engaging in storytelling to think about the how over the what. Going back to that Maya Angelou quote, making them feel something is not about speaking to the head. So the words speak to the head. The voice speaks to the heart. So that's how I want you to think about becoming a good storyteller, not just about crafting a good story.